Good morning. My name is Katina Michael. I'm coming to you from video presentation here in Kiama, New South Wales, Australia. It's a historic town about 2 hours south of Sydney. I really wish I could be there with you this morning to give this presentation in person, but I was visiting Kerala in India last October for the ICIIE Symposium and Technology and Society and just can't make it there again so quickly. The topic of my talk pertains to embedded systems. These are systems that people bear in their bodies for medical and increasingly non-medical applications. Think about electromagnetics and embedded systems and, for example, cardiac pacemakers. Cardiac pacemakers help people suffering from heart conditions. The information stored on these devices is stored remotely and sent back to base through the manufacturer. The data includes things like cardiac rhythms, ECG information, and other telemetry data denoting perhaps someone's human activity. And it is quite possible, as posed by Medtronics, that in the future every single one of us might well be bearing one of these implants in our body for diagnostics and for determining whether we are going to feel well or maybe having a potential stroke and things like that. There was a very interesting case that I noticed in January of this year. A gentleman by the name of Ross Compton in the town of Middletown, Ohio in the US was involved in a potential fraudulent case. Of course, the case hasn't yet gone to trial. The case was about arson and fraud, which it's alleged that he committed, that he separately lit 4 or 5 fires in his own home and then decided he would check out of his home holding about 2 or 3 very large bags, and he is actually a heart pacemaker recipient. When the forensic team noticed upon the inquiry, after putting out the fire, that the clothing of Mr. Compton on his shoes, his trousers and his shirt had traces of gasoline, they suspected that potentially this was a case of fraud. What they did is they subpoenaed, through a search warrant, the information on Mr. Compton's artificial heart pacemaker, trying to determine what Mr. Compton was doing before, during and after the arson occurred. So the fire broke out, Mr. Compton rang 911, he told them one version of a story. The police then arrived, the fire took out the fire, and he was questioned again by the police, and the statement he provided was slightly less aligned to that of the 911 conversation. But Mr. Compton also added in this statement that he was an ailing heart recipient of a pacemaker and that he was suffering. Now, interestingly, the police investigating this case basically said, well, there's an avenue. We can get a search warrant to get the information from the pacemaker and see whether or not Mr. Compton was in any condition to gather some important belongings into 2 or 3 large bags, place them in the front of his residence, and actually take his walking stick and break out of the burning home. Interestingly, the data was given to a cardiologist to examine. This is ECG information from the heart pacemaker. And the cardiologist, according to his witness testimony, said that it was highly unlikely that Mr. Compton, it was highly improbable that he was able to do this, gather the belongings and then actually evacuate from the home so he wasn't actually burnt himself. It is the first case of its kind where data, let's call it metadata, has actually been taken from a pacemaker device and used in a court of law. The question then becomes whether it was ethical to use this data retrospectively, whether it broke doctor-patient, confidentiality, whether the manufacturer's data is in fact current and accurate and reliable and can be used as a source of evidence, or whether Mr. Compton actually is innocent. It begs the question, when we are creating these new products, what in fact are we doing to understand the socioethics as innovators and as technology developers? The term used to describe these embedded surveillance devices of the future, not just heart pacemakers, but perhaps those devices that will be used for diagnostics, is called uberveillance. Uber from the German and valence, of course, from the French. Put together, is it an over and above exaggerated kind of surveillance, the watching of people from within the body. It is not just surveillance, for example, like cameras and monitors on a building, but it is surveillance internally of the human body organs. The question is, what will be done with all of this data emanating from body area networks in the future, and even from particular implantables that remotely send back to base? And uberveillance looks at the potential for information coming from sensors to be manipulated, to be misrepresented, and to provide some level of misinformation. Of course, the police are continually trying to use newer and newer emerging technologies to gather information from NFC cards, for instance, on transportation, to figure out whether a potential criminal is northbound or southbound at a particular timestamp of a day, in a month or a year. But increasingly we're using webmail systems now to conduct criminal investigations, and very much Google and Yahoo and the big companies need to comply when requests for such things are made by government and policing organizations. So what kinds of safeguards are we going to introduce in this uberveillance world we're living in? And should we all become accustomed to various kinds of sources of information from our bodies potentially being used in a court of law to support our alibi or to deny it? Of course, increasingly, wearable devices, and actually devices that we lug around like our smartphones, have more and more sensor information on them, provide an endless stream of discrete data, continuous data, that is being banked up on the cloud service providers. And whether this data may be used, and is just another source of data that can be used in a court of law. I do wonder what we make of this case, what we make of embedded systems and the integration of these various data flows going back remotely to the cloud, whether it is data that we are wearing. Of course, it wasn't too long ago, probably in 2014, that another heart pacemaker recipient requested access to the data stream from his pacemaker and was denied access from Motorola. So data ownership, data privacy, and even data security are in question. So when we are building these incredible control systems now, not just for medical applications but non-medical, the question is, can we prove the reliability of the information gathered from these various devices? They're just a few thoughts I want to leave you with. Of course, the world of big data is increasingly demanding that we use more and more data to make decisions, both for health and non-health reasons. One can imagine, of course, that we could all be wearing a pacemaker in the future of some kind, and that this data may be well assisting us for medical conditions or various contexts of control, care, and even convenience, perhaps entering and exiting our homes automatically. What are the limits of this data collection? What are the limits of the ability for us to analyze the data? And who should have access to this information? There are lots of different scenarios we can think about, and I'd love for you to discuss some of these during the conference as you're listening to various talks throughout the day. My thanks again for the honor of these introductory remarks, and I hope you will consider submitting your research to ICIIE Technology and Society magazine, or even Consumer Electronics magazine, as you continue in your own research endeavours. Thank you very much.